Hey everyone! On today's episode of SysAdmin Weekly, I've got Eric Siron on the show, and today we're going to be doing a bit of a back-to-basics type episode. So it's been a while since we've talked about anything Hyper-V, really, and today I figured we'd focus on some Hyper-V fundamentals and how you can get started with Microsoft virtualization in 2026. So I've got, like I said, Eric on. We're going to talk about Hyper-V, how to get started, system requirements, how you might come over from VMware, and we got that and lots more in today's episode of SysAdmin Weekly. Hey everyone, it's a new week. That means it's time for another episode of SysAdmin Weekly. This is your podcast by sysadmins for sysadmins and dedicated to all those tireless tech folks working in the trenches day in and day out to keep the digital world spinning. As always, I'm your host, Andy Syrewicze, and I've got my good friend Eric Siron with me again today, as usual. How's it going, Eric?
I'm good, Andy. How are you doing?
Doing good. Can't complain. It was a good, quiet weekend. Had a lot of time to tinker in the home lab this weekend, I guess I would say. And in case you're wondering what weekend this was, we are actually recording this Easter holiday, Easter Sunday, right? Here in the U.S. And so it was a long weekend and did a lot of lab stuff this weekend. So it was good. It was good. So anyway, we've got a good one lined up for everyone today, folks. And I was just telling Eric before we hit record, I feel like over the last 10 episodes or so, they've all been focused on soft skills or something that, some event that happened in the industry, right? And I wanted to get back to some fundamentals and some core technologies for at least a couple of episodes, right? And Eric and I both go way, way back with Hyper-V, and that is what today's episode is going to focus on, specifically getting started with Hyper-V in 2026, right? So, we'll talk about whether it's still worth your time or not. Spoiler, yes, it is. That probably doesn't need explaining, but we'll talk about that, right? We'll get into what it is for the folks that may not be familiar with it, standing it up and doing some basics, right? And I was telling Eric just before we hit record, I could see this one becoming a two-parter because I'm looking at my outline here and I'm like, okay, have I forgotten anything? We have a whole episode worth of content here and we're not even touching clustering yet, right? Well, I'm sure we'll talk about it a little bit as part of this episode, but I feel like clustering is complex enough that it probably warrants its own episode, which I think makes sense because you and I always talk about clustering, Eric, from the standpoint of Hyper-V, but the failover cluster feature in in Windows Server applies to more than just Hyper-V. A lot of people forget that. So anyway, should be a good show for everybody lined up today. Now with that, I suppose let's get into our usual recurring segments. And of course, I always have to start with my show plugs, right? So if you're new to the show, welcome. Hope you enjoy your time here. If you want a quick place to go to find all the links associated with the show, you can go to www.sysadminweekly.com. That'll get you to the website with, like I said, all the links to the show. So again, we do also have our GitHub discussion board. It's kind of the community hangout, right? We did that in place of a Discord server because I feel like everybody already has a billion Discord servers that they're part of. And I wanted it to be a little bit simpler, low barrier to entry, right? And I actually had somebody comment on the GitHub discussion boards. They said this feels old school cool, and so I'm thinking forums feel old school, and now I feel old. And the other nice thing about forums is they are easily searchable, right? And anyway. Go ahead and check those out, folks. I'll put a link there in the show notes. The other thing I will say is I have a post out on the GitHub discussion boards specifically asking for your friends and family IT support stories. Now, they could be funny stories. They could be horror stories, something in between, right? But especially on a holiday weekend, there's always family and friends IT support that we as sysadmins have to do. So again, I'm kind of collecting everyone's stories. Be sure to check that out. Add your own if you want. And I want to share as many stories from the community with attribution. That's the important part, right? With the attribution on the show as I can, because I think collectively as a community, we have probably a ton of entertaining stories, I'll say. I don't want to say funny because I'm sure there's going to be some horrifying stories in there. So I'll say entertaining instead. So anyway, so now I have our other recurring segments on the show. First is our news react segment. And I'll selfishly go first here on this one, Eric, because mine is very quick. So on our last episode of the show, talked about the news that then, when we recorded the last episode, Intel was reportedly going to be increasing the cost of consumer CPUs by 10%. Right? And we talked about how, hey, we've got basically we're being crunched on costs for all components in the data center now, right? CPU, RAM, storage. I don't think I've heard anything on networking yet, but I'm sure it's coming. Anyway, well, a week or two went by after we recorded that, and well, I saw a similar headline, except the article it was basically the same thing, but the differences were the cost increase now is going to be 15%, and it's not just Intel, it is also AMD, according to the news article I saw. So, yes, it's getting rough out there in terms of buying components. So that's, I guess, my unfortunate news item for the week. Hopefully, you have something a little bit more upbeat than mine, Eric. I guess we'll say that.
I hope so. I was excited about this. So Microsoft has apparently decided they are going to build the Windows apps. So hey, you Linux folks are going to understand this better, I think, than a lot of Windows people will. In that, so there's the kernel, which is Linux, and then there's all the applications around it, which is the GNU part.
Yep.
So Windows is clearly the same way, except it's all Microsoft. There's the kernel, which is Windows, and then there's all the little apps that are built on. They could be supported, whatever, all the things that come in the box that aren't the kernel. Microsoft has announced that they're going to start a team to build all of those apps natively. No more of this web stuff, which to me is super exciting because I remember a quote from years ago. I'd love to attribute it correctly. I don't know who said it, but they said a web application is always your second best solution. And yes, I agree with that 100%. Like, and in fact, I think it's dropping in my mind to third, that I have like a native application, pen and paper, and then a web app, because web apps have gotten so awful and just keep getting worse in my experience and opinion. So this would be, of course, they didn't really go into a lot of detail, but imagine like your control panel is no longer based on WebView, or your all the little apps and all the system applets are no longer based on WebView. They go back to just being Windows applications. So they won't take up 600 gigs of RAM for every one that you open, and you have to sit there and like, okay, well, I clicked on it a half hour ago. So am I still waiting while it thinks about loading, or did I actually not double click? It won't be any more of that stuff. It'll go back to good old web app stuff. And sorry if this hurts anyone's feelings, but I think we need to put web developers in a box, and they really need to go think about what they've done to the world for a while, because it's terrible.
Like,
so
everything's gone web app.
yeah,
Just
and
about
not
everything.
and not for a good way. I mean, I know I complain about this a lot, where developers seem to think that memory is free, and I don't think anybody violates that as hard as web developers do. That's just my opinion. Maybe I'm.
Yeah, I've seen that a little bit too. And again, if there are any web developers in, like listening to the show, apologies. I'd love to get your side of that argument too, right? Right. I know it's not every web developer, but I yes, I have seen this trend where web developers love to consume system memory.
And screen space
Anyway.
for no good reason. Like I was commenting to somebody the other day, because we got this new app at work that we all have to use, and it's like, I remember 13-inch tube screens with zero graphics, just text, and 13 inches, right?
Yep.
smaller than your face. And they could fit more information in that 320 by 200 pixel space than modern web developers can get into my 35-inch widescreen. You know, it's like everything, all elements need to be at least 4 inches apart. And uh, what are you
Man.
doing, guys? I could fill out an entire, like, remember the little green screen and you go in there and the lady's in there and you could just hear,
Oh
and
yeah.
she's doing it. And then she sits back and waits and like pages fill up all, basically by magic is what it kind of looks like. But there's more on that little bitty tiny screen okay, what have we done? What have we done? And if you
Sidebar.
make it smaller so that you can put two things together, well, then it just shrinks everything and makes it even worse. Like, okay, guys, there's this thing called
Right.
Flex Grid. Have y'all heard about Flex Grid? It's totally cool. You should try it out. Sorry,
This talk of
rant over, rant over. But
no, okay,
the positive thing being somebody at Microsoft is apparently at least thinking in the correct direction and like, hey, you know what? Maybe let's not do this for a bit, see what happens. I'm like,
uh,
where do I
I
upvote? Where do I upvote?
right? Tell us where. I'll have to take a look and see if they've got that somewhere. But this brings up a couple of things for me. So one, yes, great thing that they're doing this. Um, it reminds me of I was listening to Windows Weekly. I check in on Windows Weekly once, I don't know, every month or two. Fantastic show with Paul Thurrott, and they were talking about the Microsoft made an announcement, or there's a blog post. I don't remember what exactly. I don't keep super close tabs on Windows itself these days, but there was some sort of announcement that said, "Hey, we want people to love Windows again, and we're going to be making all these changes." And I wonder if this falls into that particular announcement. And the timing of all this is kind of eyebrow raising for me because have you seen the MacBook Neo, Eric? Have you seen that? I
Yep.
mean, what, like five? No, is it 499 or 599 starting point? I don't remember which.
It's yeah, it's
Um,
like most of the articles I've seen are like pushing is under $600 to start. So
yeah,
wherever,
and so I mean, like, I, that's unheard of in terms of having a Mac. And I mean, it's not the most powerful thing out there, but I've seen videos of people
no.
editing 4K video with it. Like,
Well,
uh,
and yeah, this is Apple hitting the, like, Microsoft will turn out a wonderful product and then market it so poorly that everybody misses the point. So there was the
yeah,
iPad, okay, and then Microsoft came out with the Surface, which is what the Neo is. But their marketing missed the point so badly, everybody was like, well, your iPad is terrible. Like, but it wasn't supposed to be an iPad. It was supposed to be this small, inexpensive computer, and they fumbled every little bit of it. Now the Surface is ridiculously expensive, and there's so many things about the Surface I do not like anymore. But when the Surface debuted, it was what the Neo is. Microsoft beat Apple to the punch by
yeah,
years, but they couldn't market for
yeah,
Apple knows how
agreed.
to market things.
I remember the Surface RT many,
Yep.
many years ago.
Yep. And if you get rid of all the limitations of RT and just make it a Windows device, small form factor, inexpensive Windows device, not a tablet,
Yep.
even though it kind of looked like one and had all, but it was not supposed to be a tablet, and they didn't push that hard enough. So everybody's like, "Oh, your iPad's terrible." Yeah, if that's the market you're trying to get it to play in, it is a terrible iPad, but it was a great small computer,
Yeah.
and they just completely anyway. So where they whiffed, Apple was like, "Well, we can market it correctly," and there you go. That's what the Neo is, and
Right.
good on Apple for hitting. But Microsoft beat them to the punch. They just didn't know what to do with it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I see that the popularity, or the seeming popularity, I don't have data to back that right now, but the seeming popularity of the Neo, now it's like, okay, that seems to be a major player in kind of that lower to mid end, notebook market. And
Yep.
so I don't know. I just thought the timing was
Yep.
interesting, right?
Yeah, to
So
kind of go. Yeah, there's a yes, yes. I think and there's a lot of other market shifts too with other things going on. I think Microsoft has realized, for one thing, I realized that they have figured out this thing with AI is not going to go the way they wanted it to go. Um, People are pushing back on the "you will own nothing and you will like it" thing. The world has
oh, they are.
decided we don't really want that anymore. You may think it's great in the corporate offices, but we hate it as consumers. And so I think, yeah, they're thinking, well, we're going to have to figure out what our market really is, where we can sell and where we can not make people hate us because,
Right.
yeah.
Yep. For sure. Well, that's a good segue, I think, into our Nerd Hour segment. And, if you want the joke behind the title Nerd Hour, you can go back to like episode 0 or 1. We explained it very early in the show's history. But this is the segment of the show where my co-host Eric, my co-host, and I we talk about the geeky, nerdy things that we've been doing either in our spare time or in our day job. Eric, I went first for News React, so I'll let you start with this one. What do
Well,
you
I
got?
haven't been doing very much nerdy. I've been kind of enjoying the spring turning around, so I've been outside looking at the sun. It hurts, but
You've been touching grass.
I've been touching grass, yeah. So I don't really have anything to contribute that's all that especially nerdy. Uh, I guess at work has been Citrix playing their fun games of make you spend a week updating all your net scalers over a high grade vulnerability. That's always fun. Drop
Yeah,
everything because
that was a pretty high CVSS score, if I remember right. I
it
remember
was
seeing the
very
headline.
high and
Yeah.
it was unpleasant. Also, coincides with they're pushing everybody to this new licensing model where you don't just put a license file on your machine anymore. Now you have to connect it to this cloud service and funny now. And then we had some pieces that we were just kind of using as well, we'll try stuff out on them and didn't really keep up on the warranty, and now we can't patch them anymore. Conveniently, right when this 9 something CVE comes out, and
Oh, yeah.
cool, So all right, well, what are we gonna? We got well now we can't have them, even though they're not really running anything important. You still can't have them in the organization anymore. So yay, all kinds of decisions we got to make in like a week. Thanks, Citrix. Appreciate that. Also, while it takes, because their updating patch for their updating process for the NetScaler is very, very solid 1996 and it's just awful. So
What, like,
I'm really not being very positive today.
so you say from 1996, it's making me think like, oh, okay, I need to reboot the NetScaler with a floppy inserted that contains the new firmware, and hopefully it's not that old of a process.
Yeah, well, so they call it firmware. That's what they call it because it is a
Right.
device. But what it really is somebody sits down at Citrix and they put all the updates on whatever their device is and they image it, and then you put the image on there, and it basically deletes everything except your config files and
Yeah.
replaces it. Operating system, all the components. It's running a Linux or not a Linux, a Unix BSD Unix fork.
Yeah.
So it replaces the entire operating system, all the little bits and pieces and whatever. And they only change like 6 files, but it's
Right.
still like a gig and a half update. But it's not an update. It's basically a re-image of the whole thing, top to bottom, with your config files. And
It's like
like,
redeploying
really,
a container with a persistent config, basically.
yeah. Except imagine it was gigantic, and the machine also takes up to 20 minutes to restart. And you can
Oh no.
in your NetScaler pack, you can only have one active at a time, and your entire organization is dependent on it. And of course, I work in a hospital, so it's. I'm probably overstating things, but man, I just every single time I have another patch, I'm like, oh come on.
Well, best of luck on that, my friend. Hopefully,
I'm
you
through it. I'm through.
good,
I'm through. I just every time this
good.
happens, I'm like, really? Do we need Citrix that bad? I know they have competition. Then
Well,
I'm going to go on
hopefully,
my show and I'm going to complain to the entire universe about it, and they're going to think, huh, do we need Citrix? So I should probably be careful before I get myself in trouble, but
was gonna say I don't want the Citric lawyers knocking on my front door. I'm just saying.
I don't think the lawyers can come for us. I haven't said anything that isn't absolutely truth, but
No, that's you're
I know some of
absolutely
their
correct.
salespeople are like, you're not making things easy for me. Like, I'm the one who's not making things. Maybe you'll talk to your engineers a little bit. How about if Windows 98 had a better update process, maybe you should think about that.
Very true. So
Oh, I said that part
very
out loud,
true.
didn't I? I wasn't supposed to say
No,
it out
that's a good one. No, anyway. Well, my nerd hour segment. I've been very busy in my lab, and as folks know, I've been I- last week I had been dabbling with the idea of spinning up a software forge in my home lab, and well, I've done it now. I have and I figured out how to properly pronounce the name of the my choice of software for this. I thought it was Forge.jo. I wasn't far off. It's Forgeo, basically Forgeo or something like that. It's like a Spanish term of some sort. So this is a software project that is a fork of Gitea, and I've been very, very happy with it thus far. And I've been migrating quite a bit of my GitHub repositories to it, and I've got Restic backing it up both locally and off-site. And yes, for those people that are familiar with Git, you're probably like, but wait, you have a copy of that data on like every endpoint you work with the repository. Why are you back it up? Well, I want to back up the Forge config, right? So anyway, so I've got that, but I've also started tinkering with Claude Code as well too.
Ooh.
And I'm very skeptical anytime I start tinkering with AI products. I gotta say, Claude Code is for real, man. Like I'm pleasantly surprised at how good Claude Code is. And what is so amazing about it, if nobody's tinkered with it yet, is it takes the context of whatever folder you start it in. So, for example, one thing that has kind of been a pain for the production of the show is, I come up with some topic ideas that I want to cover on the show. Have we covered any of these yet? You know, okay, yeah, I could go back and scroll through. We have close to 50 episodes now, right? But my outlines for every single episode are in subfolders. I have a whole folder hierarchy. Well, Claude Code, I build a simple Claude.md file that kind of explains, hey, this is the type of stuff I want you to do inside this repository. This is what the folder structure looks like. It understands the repository. And so I was able to ask Claude Code, like, hey, I'm thinking about doing an episode on, Hyper-V in 2026. Have we done any shows like this yet? And it just, happily goes out and looks at all my subfolders and looks at all the outlines. Like, no, you haven't done this specific topic, but you have covered Hyper-V in a couple other episodes, and here they are, right? And it just makes me a nice markdown formatted list, and it's incredible for stuff like that. Things that would have taken me time to go and gather all that information myself, right? And yeah, I could have made a bash script that would go and pull the heading, and because they're all markdown files, like pull the heading in each of the files. But instead of taking 30 minutes to write that bash script and get it working properly, I just asked Claude Code, and it had the information in front of me in like 2 minutes. So it was massive time saver. And so I've been pleasantly surprised. This whole concept of having it's essentially an agent, right, that runs within the root folder of the repository on your local machine, and the fact that you can give it template files to look at and the Claude.md file, which tells it how to operate inside of this repository. Game changer. It's no longer just a chat bot. It's like operating very much exactly how I want it to operate. And I've been impressed so far. I've been very impressed. So highly recommend you folks check it out if you have not yet. It's been fun to tinker with. Anyway, that's my nerd hour.
No, I think that's great because what you're hitting here is, when used well, AI is amazing.
Yes,
Because
absolutely.
and I know I've been, as much as anybody else, reminding people that AI has an extremely dark side that's going to, if we're not about how,
Yep.
like, all these CEOs come out, oh, it's going to take your job, it's going to take your job. And we had a discussion, you and I, here. And one of the things I'd said is, these CEOs look at you as though you are just a compilation of tasks, and that's why they think AI can do your job.
Yep.
And it was maybe 2 weeks after we had that conversation when somebody came out and said, hey, a lot of these companies are figuring out AI is great at doing tasks, but it's not great at doing jobs. And
Yep.
you right there with your little nerd hour just completely explained, I gave it this task and it
Yep.
killed it. And that's the
Yep.
entire thing. Like, if you want to be in the, it's people listening, I should say, when I say you, if you want to take AI to that next level, that's what you have to do. You have to find a task that you can set it to that it can demolish. It's not going to do a job, but it will do a task amazingly well. And that's
Yep.
kind of like Andy, you just showed like your own personal genius on how you got AI to do an agent task and come out with these amazing results. And that's that right there. That's what AI is going to do for us, and where we
Yep.
need our skills so we can go, okay, this is a task for AI and not for me, right?
Yep. And
So
the other
good
thing
on
I've been
you.
able to do and the other thing I've been able to do with it, I appreciate the kind words, by the way. I was gonna say the other thing that I've been able to do with it that has been immensely powerful is, um, for research for some content projects I've been working on. Think of the way we used to do things is go out, do a search on Google, go find 5 sources, look through them manually. I, I don't have to do that anymore. I can tell it and configure it using the config files and the template files and stuff I've set up in these repos. I can tell it like, hey, I am looking for X specifically. Now, I don't want to use this type of website or this type of website. I want you to pull from these 5 websites, right? Go out and find information that's relevant for X. And it's just, it goes out and looks at 30 different websites for me and, puts the information in a nice, easy way for me to digest, specifically in the context that I want it for whatever
Hmm.
it is I'm working on. And so
And
it
I
just,
want to warn everybody on that the days of that are probably going to be limited because I've already seen how can we get ads into our AI? The next thing that's
oh,
going to be
yes.
happening is like where we had Google SEO forever is going to be, how do I get AI to consider me more authoritative than somebody who disagrees with me? And it'll be
Yep.
money driven. It won't be fact based. So use that while you can, because I have a feeling the days of that may be limited.
Yep.
Because something I've said for a long time, AI has no discernment whatsoever. That's its
Nope.
Achilles heel. It has no
Yep.
discernment. It can't tell trash information from authoritative information. And so there'll be people buying their way to make AI think they're the authority on something or another. So use that while you can and keep a very close eye on the quality of that return
Yep,
diminishing.
exactly. And that's the thing. Whenever I work with an AI, with a return from AI, I'm always looking at the output with extreme skepticism, right? Like I am not confident in its output until I have vetted everything it said myself. And maybe I I've seen hallucination too much to trust it outright. But anyway, well, I'm sensitive to the fact that we are 26 minutes in and we've been nerding out over nerd hour, so I think we should probably get to our
Let's
main
do it.
segment here, Eric. What do you think?
Let's do that.
So again, today we are covering how to get started with Hyper-V in 2026. Again, more of a fundamentals episode, but I think important, for those folks that are just starting to get into the Hyper-V world, or for those folks that maybe have been working in it for a while and maybe you want to round out your knowledge of it a little bit, right? I mean, I swear every time I sit down, my original Microsoft MVP status was in Hyper-V, and I swear I'm still learning new things about Hyper-V that I didn't know about on occasion, right? Um, and so uh, I think for me that right there is probably the first thing worth pointing out when I get to my first bullet point here, and that bullet point is, why is Hyper-V still worth your attention in 2026? When we talk about the maturity of software, Hyper-V's been out for since 2008 R2. I think it was actually in 2008 if I remember correctly, but it was a
It was a
little bit
different, like,
different.
there was some asterisks with, like, I think you had to pay extra to get it, like $50 or some trivial
Yeah.
amount, but there's some, yeah.
But 2008 R2, Windows Server 2008 R2 is when Hyper-V, I don't want to say hit the mainstream. It was usable in the enterprise at larger scale with 2008 R2. I would say it hit the mainstream in like 2012 R2, because they added a lot of highly needed features for enterprises in those releases. But my point here being is, when you're choosing a software that is as foundational to your environment as your hypervisor. You want to choose something that has been around for a while, right? And Hyper-V fits the bill. Now, we've talked about the VMware Broadcom thing probably ad nauseum on the show in different episodes. I'll put links to those episodes in the show notes. But what I found, and I'm still finding, is that there are a lot of people that are still, saying bye to VMware and they're looking for alternatives. A lot of people have kind of standardized on Proxmox, but a lot of people are looking at Hyper-V too. And again, because of its maturity, because it's been around for a while, because maybe they want to do hybrid stuff with Azure and it lends itself well to that. There's a lot of different reasons why people are doing that, right? And uh, I think the other big thing is, and it's kind of an aha moment when people stop to think about it, is when you talk about the licenses that you have in-house already. Maybe you've been a VMware shop, you're running 30 Windows virtual machines, right? Obviously, you had to license those virtual machines. Well, guess what? If you're licensed for VMware, chances are, you want to double check this, but chances are you already have all the licensing you need for Hyper-V, right? Because Hyper-V just comes with Windows Server and you have to license the OSE, operating system environment, if I remember correctly, right, Eric?
That is what that stands for. Yep. And so the easiest way to do this is kernel. Every time you have a Windows kernel that needs a license of some kind, and then that's the point where we differentiate what kind of kernel is it, determines what kind of license you need. The OSE, the operating system environment, that is what is in the licensing lingo.
Yep.
Their lingo, their docs, their publications. That's what everything is. OSE, OSE, OSE. But just every time you see OSE, think an actual full-on Windows kernel. That's what
Yep.
That's where they're going to draw the line.
And that's a good point of that's a good way of explaining it. And I know you and I we've done videos on licensing for Hyper-V. I don't remember if we've done one specifically for this show or not. My point in bringing that up is licensing Hyper-V is just complex enough that it would probably necessitate its entire show, its own show. But the main thing there being is accounting for virtual machine mobility. The fact that with Windows Server Standard, you get two VOSEs of virtual operating system environments with each fully. So when you license a host fully with standard, right? Because it's core-based licensing still, if I remember correctly, isn't it, Eric?
It is. So basically, you look at the number of physical cores in your host, and that tells you how many licenses you need to buy. So they and it's always fun because it seems easy until you actually start trying to apply it. You're like, wait. So first of all, physical sockets. Start there, right? Sockets.
Yep.
How many sockets are on your main board? One or two counts the same because you're always licensing two sockets at the same time, even if you only have one, but you're still licensing two. All right. And then each core pair, so there's the core on the first socket and there's the core on the second socket. That's what one Windows license covers. Okay, that license, that core pair. So then if you have an 8 core, then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then there's 8 on the other one, you're covering both of them at the same time, even if the second one's not there. Okay?
Yep.
That's how that works. And so basically, and you have to buy a certain number of minimum, which I want to say is 8. God, I could be wrong about it. You have to buy a certain number. So even if you only have 6, you still have to buy 8. And even if you only have 1, you still have to buy 8 pairs. Right?
Yep.
That's sometimes clear as mud, and sometimes people are like, okay, I get it. But you're licensing pairs of cores across, one socket, two socket, even if you don't have a two socket, a minimum number, which I believe is 8. So now you're up to 8 on 2, which is 16 total cores. And then for each core after that, each core pair, you buy another license until you hit whatever number of actual physical cores you have. And like if you're thinking, well, geez, what about hyperthreading, which is the SMT? I think AMD just calls SMT. Those are not anything in licensing. It's the literal physical core, which is the the package that you buy from your vendor. They'll tell you it's an 8-core, 16-core, 32-core, whatever. So
Yep.
once you've licensed all those correctly with a Windows standard, that gives you the legal right to run 2 virtualized kernels, Windows kernels.
Yep. Windows kernels. Yep.
Yes. As long as the see, more stars, more asterisks, more stuff to make it more fun. If the physical kernel is Windows and it is doing anything that has nothing to do with the virtual machines, like file serving or SQL print, anything that's not specifically related to those virtual machines, then it sucks away one of your virtual licenses so that you only get one left. So what you can do, if you have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 kernels you want to run, virtual kernels, you license the box again. You buy enough to license all those cores again. And every time you do that, you get another 2 virtual instances. And somewhere along the way, which depends on your pricing with your vendor and whatever else, you hit a point where that's dumb to keep stacking licenses like that, and you'll buy a data center edition. And it used to be, once upon a time, when you hit between 11 and 12 virtual kernels, that's where you'd like, okay, it's not worth it to buy standard anymore. We'll buy data center instead.
Because
Okay.
data center gives you unlimited VOSEs.
Yes. So you only
Yep.
license all those cores you license from one time with data center, and then you can run as many VOSEs as you want. And you also get the full storage spaces direct package. A
Yep.
couple other little things come with it that are so. So a lot of times the big question we get, and the reason I kind of want to really spend a couple minutes on it, is people are like, well, I can do this with standard, but I want to run 3 VMs, so now I have to go to data center. Like, no, that's not true.
Nope.
You just have to relicense the box again. But every time you do that, you get 2. So like, well, I want to run 3 VMs. Like, okay, well, now you have enough for a 4th. Again, it's the same thing as you may not have a second socket filled in your main board, but you have to license 2 at a time anyway, period. And it's the
Right.
same deal with the virtual is you can only buy them in pairs. So there were a couple of changes to the licensing. One of them, I think it was with 2025, is you can license the individual virtual instance. I don't know much about that, so I'm going to stay away from it. Sounded like the pricing for it was worse though, so kind of doesn't
Yeah,
matter.
it's
And
not
then
gonna be bad.
there's also the Azure pay as you go or something. There's a when you're installing it and it asks you what you want to license. There's another one. It's like a pay as you go thing, which then also licenses the instance and not has nothing to do with the kernels or anything like that, or sorry, the processors. But again, it's like it was quite a bit more expensive than just licensing the old standard versus data center way. So it seems like we always come back to you got to do all the math and figure all out if you want to save the most money.
That was a heck of a crash course on Hyper-V licensing.
Yeah, and it's scary, and you almost always run into, well, what about this? What about that? What I always tell people
Yep.
is, first of all, this is a legal thing. Licensing has nothing to do with the nerd stuff. It's all about the lawyer stuff. So
Yep.
what I do is you're going to have to buy your Windows licenses from somebody, probably like a Dell or an HP or whatever. So you call your sales weasel and you say, hey, man, I need to talk to your licensing expert. Get him on the phone. Get her on the phone. I need to talk to your licensing expert, and then you let them explain it to you. Or you just say, this is what I want to do, and they'll say, this is what you need to buy. Let them
Yep.
figure it out because they work with Microsoft to get credentialing and so on and so forth to actually know this stuff. And you
Yep.
might even be able to get them to say, I want to be careful here. It's not impossible to have them indemnify you. And basically, if you get audited, Microsoft says you screwed up, it becomes your license person's fault. But a lot of times it also comes back to you have to do literally exactly everything they say, right? Because they're not going to put themselves on the line and then have you turn
Right.
around and install an extra 10 uh, virtual machines and I got away with something and then dump it on Dell. Dell's not going to take that. So,
Yeah, it's not gonna end well
yeah,
for you.
I would, no, no. So I always encourage you, just let your licensing folks figure it out. They're on payroll for your supplier. Just let them do it.
Yeah.
And don't listen
Makes
to me
sense.
because I may have lost my mind. Even though I think I'm right, I may have lost my mind too. So let's not. Get that person with the actual check mark from Microsoft that says they're legally allowed to talk about that stuff. And
Yeah, I mean, we can certainly provide guidance by what our understanding of it is, right? But licensing, I found, is one, like you said, it's a legal thing, right? And it needs to be treated as such. Two, Microsoft loves to change the licensing on the regular, and it drives me crazy.
it's about quarterly.
So,
I think quarterly they update and publish a new. And then it used to be called. It was called one thing, and then it became the product use rights document. Now I think it's called
yep,
something else. And then
yep,
I believe they update it quarterly. And so yeah, just punt that to
yep,
somebody at your provider as fast as you can. Don't deal with it. Don't think about it. Don't. It'll hurt your skull. Because then you
yep,
get into, well, what if I want to live migrate this virtual machine to this host? Then what? Well, the answer is that host already needs to be licensed for it. The license doesn't go with it unless you paid for the other license that I was talking about. See what I mean? And right away you start, well, what about this? What about that? And yeah, it'll hurt your
yep.
head. So
Good advice. Checking with the licensing expert, definitely. So assuming you're still with us, right? You've made the
didn't
decision.
run you off.
Licensing is like that, but sysadmins have to deal with licensing, right? It's part of the job, unfortunately, especially if
Mm-hmm.
you're in a small shop. So, um, but
Oh,
I was
even in a
saying
big
that, like,
shop, we get the emails from are you going to pay your license? You're past due. Like, what? That's not even my, okay.
that's not my thing. Like,
No, no,
there's a
what are you talking
PO for
about?
that, right?
I can't write a check. What are you, I mean, I can. It's not going to be worth anything, but.
Oh man.
Mm,
So, you know, you're in the trenches. You've made the decision, like, hey, I'm going to start using Hyper-V, right? We've given you the crash course on how to license it, how to look at it. Like, so let's back up here for a second, right? So, like, everybody knows that, well, not everybody, but, you've probably heard that Hyper-V is Microsoft's virtualization solution, right? But I want to get a little bit deeper into the weeds on what it actually is, right? So, Microsoft presents it as a Windows Server role, right? So I can see how people who are not familiar with it just kind of assume that, like, oh, hey, it's part of Windows, right? It just gets tacked on. That's not the case. Hyper-V is what's known as a Type 1 hypervisor, right? Where you've got your bare metal and then the hypervisor and then the virtual machines, right? There's also this Type 2 hypervisor, which runs on top of the host operating system. In that case, you've got bare metal, the host operating system, then a virtualization layer, right? And it's not as efficient. So
right. So
Hyper-V again is a
your
type
examples
1.
there that people are going to know are going to be VirtualBox is a type 2.
Yep, type 2. Yep,
So if you open up Task Manager and you can see the actual hypervisor itself, that's type 2.
yep,
And there's
exactly.
some billion ways to look at it. Yeah. So because
And
people
so,
get confused, especially coming out of VMware, because when you boot up VMware, you see it boots. Oh, it's booting to VMware. Well, it's
yep,
no. So uh, when they look at Hyper-V, like, well, it's booting to Windows, so that can't be a type 1. It is a type 1.
it is.
Well, I'm sorry
And
I
how
cut
about
you off, and I don't know where you were going, but I kind of want to. I've had this
no, no,
discussion not too long ago, so
no worries. You started going down the route I was going to, and because I always explain this type 1 thing with Hyper-V through the lens of actually enabling the Hyper-V role, and then it becomes much more clear. So you'll hear this term in the Hyper-V world, this partition, this concept of a partition, which most people would be like, yeah, like a storage partition, right? Well, not in this case. We don't mean storage partition. You'll also hear the term guest or guest VM, right? Guest and partition, roughly the same thing, right? It's a unit that sits on top of
I'm
the
going to disagree with
hypervisor.
that. I'm going to
Okay.
disagree with that.
Okay.
I have a now part of it. So, have you ever worked with the IBM virtualization platforms? I mean, the
I have
old ones, like
I
on an
have not.
AS400. Okay,
I have
so
not.
that is
And this might
where
be why
I
we
first. It
disagree.
could be because that's where I first saw the this kind of partition terminology. Now
Okay.
VMware does it too. They just I don't know what their terms are. Maybe they don't even talk about it. I don't really know. But all your type 1 hypervisors are doing this in which The hypervisor is building up a logical. See, I used to use the word container, and then the word container got changed into something else, and it makes me mad because I don't really have a better word than container.
Right,
But
right.
it basically sets up this thing that is completely 100% self-contained, and that is a partition. You're like, well, that's a really big thing. Like, yeah, it is. I'm sorry, but that's how it thinks, right? It's got this partition will then look. It is a software definition of a computer system, just like if you were to go to the store and buy a bare bones computer with nothing really on it, just like a shell, the case and a main board and a CPU and all the little bits and pieces on the main board and all that, and that's it. That's the whole thing, and that's if you think of that as a physical partition, then that is what these partitions are, right?
Right.
So your guess where you were going next, well, that's an operating system. That requires more. You got to have storage, which a partition
True.
technically doesn't need storage, right?
True.
But an
Yep.
operating system does. It's got to run from something. So yeah, that's kind of where I think it's probably just a matter of perspective too. And again, coming back from IBM, because like IBM was like, well, if you're going to run hours, so you have to define it, what it looks like this many CPUs and this much memory and everything, and you had to buy it from them. Like, I already own it. Well, too bad. You had to buy it from them anyway. You own the hardware, but now
Right.
you got to, they were called LPARs. That's what a logical partition, LPARs
Yep.
from IBM terminology. So yeah, but then there's nothing in it. It's just completely blank empty, and then you got to go do something with it. And so the partition has nothing useful in it. You got to add the operating system or add there's
Mhm.
if you want to go
And
appliance style, there's other things you could technically do. You could turn it into like an embedded something or another if you're way beyond my ability, but there's like an entire separate API for Hyper-V on creating and defining platforms, which you can't do through any of the stuff we normally do. But you can sit down in your
right.
favorite programming language and use the Hyper-V partitioning API and define a partition that doesn't look anything like a normal computer system if you wanted to.
That's interesting. See, I'm learning new things about Hyper-V I never knew. I didn't know that there was an API that you could actually interact with partitions because, and I was just going to say this, the only places where the term partition is actually mentioned is when you get really in the weeds on like the developer docs. That's the only place it's mentioned in regards to Hyper-V,
Yep.
which that's why I kind of likened the terminology to guest because in Learn you'll see this terminology guest VM, and it's kind of associated with that partition term when you think about the architecture of Hyper-V. I have my bare metal, I have my hypervisor, then I have my partitions, aka my guest virtual machines, right?
Yes. So it's going to and there's always fun things in our languages that we use to communicate. So usually the precision doesn't matter. Now, I would
Right.
say 99 times out of 100, trying to say that a partition and a guest VM aren't exactly the same thing doesn't really matter.
Right. I mean,
But
most people are just
since
going to say
we're
VM anyway.
most people are just going to say VM, and then
Yep.
99% of the time, it's not going to. The distinction makes no difference, so it doesn't matter. And I don't. I'm only splitting hairs right now because of where we are in the discussion. Most of the time, you
Right.
won't hear me get people use whatever term they want. As long as I know what you mean, I'm fine, whatever, I let it go, you know?
Yeah. And so where I was going with this and kind of explaining how Hyper-V is a type 1 hypervisor is I always explain it from the standpoint of enabling the role, right? Okay, I just stood up a new box, I've installed Windows Server on it, and I either use Server Manager or PowerShell to install the Hyper-V role. What is happening under the hood? Now, what happens is Hyper-V is actually itself very, very small. I forget exactly the size of the hypervisor. It's not all that
300
large.
megs,
Yeah,
like 300
it's
megs all in, like all in, 300 megs
yeah,
done.
it's not big. But basically what happens when you enable the role is Windows slides that hypervisor role on top of the hardware, and then it takes the operating system, the host operating system that you just installed the role in, and it turns itself into its own dedicated partition, aka guest VM. It's like a special virtual machine on the system that allows you
Yep.
to manage the hypervisor and everything on it, right? That's the best way I've always described it is it looks like you're still interacting with bare metal, but you're not. You're just connected to a virtual machine now running on top of the hypervisor, right?
right. And kind of and something to point out that Windows has worked this way for a really long time. It
Yeah.
just wasn't very obvious, and it's a little bit more because I started with DOS, then I went to Windows 2, then I went to Windows 3, and then so I've been there for the progression, and I've watched it change. So it is a little bit more obvious to me what has happened, but we stopped being what they called real mode operating systems and went into well, what's it? I don't even know what it's called now. They used to be the real mode is what they were. DOS. DOS was real mode. Then that is super easy to break. With hackers coming out, they would have viruses that would do things like tell the graphics card to run at 3,000 hertz, and it would really try to do that, and the machine would catch fire, right?
Huh.
So they converted, and then starting with 32-bit, real mode is available, but no operating system today uses it and hasn't for a really long time. So the only thing I can ever think of is virtual mode, but I'm pretty sure that's not right. But it doesn't. Somebody will correct me. Somebody will figure it out and give you the big answer. But it doesn't matter. What's happening for a very, very long time is there is this layer between there's the hardware, then we flip out of real mode and we go into this other mode in the
Yeah.
CPU, and then Windows kernel starts up, and then it loads all these other pieces, and it makes this virtualized box for the operating system to run in, and then all these other boxes for other things to run in. And once upon a time, Windows itself termed those things as virtual machines.
Yeah.
And then just like how the term container kind of got swept out from under me, the term virtual machine kind of got swept out under from Microsoft too. And so they had to kind of shift. But Windows has operated in this kind of basic segregation of everything for a very long time. Hyper-V now takes it a step further. So instead of booting into the Windows kernel, first you boot into the Hyper-V kernel, and then it defines these much more rigid partitions, like you were explaining. The
Yep.
the very first one is they call it the management partition. We might call it the
Yep.
host partition. Partition 0 is what the LPAR terminology is, and I believe
Yep.
VMware calls it partition 0, and that's where that operating system you actually visually see on the console. Like you plug in the HDMI port on your physical machine, and you look at it. That is the management partition, the root
Yep.
partition, partition 0 is what you're
Yep.
looking at,
Yep.
and it still has that. If you've ever seen the term hardware abstraction layer, right? That's that layer that Windows has been putting between you and your actual physical hardware forever, so you can no longer tell the CPU or the GPU to run at 3,000 hertz. It's not going to do that. No, it'll refuse to do it, right? Because
Right.
you have to go to the hardware abstraction layer, and it doesn't have an interface for that anymore. So we are now basically putting in that other little shim in there, this hypervisor. So it's not entirely alien from what we've been doing for a very long time, but a lot of sysadmins don't know about it because you really don't have to know about it.
You don't have to. Right. Right. But I see the question once in a while, right? Like, because it always comes up in that conversation of like, well, Hyper-V is a type 2 hypervisor, actually.
Right. And
No, it's not.
no, it's really not. It isn't. It is a separate kernel. And that is really the biggest thing. It is
Yep.
its own kernel, and it is the first kernel that starts when the machine starts,
Yep.
when the
Yep.
physical machine starts. And then
For
it
sure.
kicks off your host, which is the one that you see. And pointing out, VMware does exactly the same thing.
They
When
do.
it boots up
Right.
and you see this, it booting into VMware, and I don't think it is. It used to be a fork of Red Hat a long, long time ago, and I don't think it has been for also a really long time.
I
But
think the
it
last
is
time that
booting
was like
into
version 2.
really okay. All right. Anyway, but they're booting into their kernel starts up, the ESXi kernel starts, and then it kicks off this host partition. And inside that host partition is the one that you can get into and run ESX top and all the other things.
Yep.
It's running its own little VM, which is inside of this one partition. Now, the root partition has much more access to the hardware than all the other
Sure
partitions,
does.
which is
Yep.
probably the next topic you were going to, and that's what makes it different than all the other partitions, is it can talk to some components of the hardware directly.
Yep. And it can carve off things like storage and networking and allocate them to the other virtual machines. And it's I guess I'm going to go with my Tron reference here. It's the master control program for the host, right?
Yeah.
Essentially at that point. So, you
And
and
a,
I
lo-
haven't gotten
and a
in. Go ahead.
And a lot of what it does, it actually communicates with the Hyper-V kernel and asks the Hyper-V kernel to do those things on its behalf. So it's not even really doing some of the things that it looked like it's doing. So
Right. Yep. I was just gonna say, you and I haven't gotten in the weeds on Hyper-V here in a while, and it reminds me to some of the conversations we've had with our friend Ben Armstrong at times. And I was just thinking, we need to get Ben on the show,
that'd be great to
and
have him around.
we will learn more about Hyper-V than we ever set out to learn. Right? So for folks that don't know, Ben Armstrong was the product manager in charge of Hyper-V for a long time, long time.
And
Um,
Microsoft acquired him when they bought Connectix, and Connectix was the company that made the virtual server, right, or virtual PC, or
Yeah,
both.
the virtual PC, I think it was called.
Yeah, so he brought that knowledge into Microsoft with him, and really is responsible for a lot of the things about Hyper-V that we love today.
Yep, yep. I mean, you just think about where Hyper-V ended up throughout the entire ecosystem, right? I mean, it runs in Azure. A lot of people don't know this part. Hyper-V runs on Xbox, believe it or not. So that was a interesting, albeit useless piece of trivia that I have in my brain that I just find
It's
entertaining,
it's
right? So,
it's useful in the sense that a lot of that, especially VMware got really well. Microsoft's abandoning Hyper-V, and they come and Microsoft's like, well, actually, here are all the places you can go to find Hyper-V. It's and with the takeaway being Hyper-V holds Microsoft up. It's not going anywhere.
right, right. So, anyway. So we've kind of defined it at its very lowest level, right? What it is, how it's a type 1. Um, coming back to the practical side of things and not quite so far in the weeds here, what do you actually need to get it stood up, right? Like, okay, you've decided to put it in the environment, you kind of know how it works at an architectural level. Hardware requirements are not crazy to get it started, right? You need something that has a SLAT capable CPU, SLAT. My memory is failing me what SLAT stands for again off the top of my head.
Second level address translation.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. That's the one. You
I'm in the
rescued me
safe
on that one.
space, safe space to act like a nerd, right? Because man, I just belted that out like it was.
Yeah, that's a good one. So you need a SLAT capable CPU. You have to have virtualization enabled in the firmware, and depending on whether you're Intel or AMD, it might be named something slightly different inside of the firmware. So you have to make sure that's enabled, and you have to have enough memory to not hate yourself, right? Because I say it that way because, I've seen people try to stand up Hyper-V on, they're just testing it in a lab, and they stood it up on a machine that has 4 gigs of memory, and the host is consuming a portion of that, right? And you could run like one virtual machine or something like that. Um, but you whatever the job at hand is, you want to make sure you have enough memory. To allocate, right? And one of the things I wrote in our outline here, Eric, is what things kind of trip people up on first install. And to me, I think installing Hyper-V is fairly easy these days. Actually getting it installed and spinning up the first virtual machine is not too hard. What I find trips people up is when they're architecting larger deployments, more than one
Mhm.
host, clustering, which I think we'll cover in our clustering episode. But is there anything you want to cover or call out now before we move on?
I would recommend people start with client Hyper-V to kind of get your feet wet
Yes.
with it. This is the one that's on Windows 11. You need Home Edition won't do it, but anything else will. Um, because on the server, the number one thing that kills people is always the virtual switch. And I
Yes.
hate this. I hate this. I hate this. The more VMware experience you have, the harder it's going to be for you to pick up on the Hyper-V virtual switch because they are
Yep.
radically different in the way that they do everything. So I'm going to say the networking is absolutely the Hyper-V virtual switch is absolutely the hardest thing to get your head wrapped around at first.
Yep.
So just expect networking to be painful until you get it. And once you get it, you're like, oh, that wasn't so hard. This seems so simple now. But give yourself the grace and the time to absorb that this is radically It's yeah, and I'm going to blame some of this on the interfaces. I think the interfaces that guide you through the Hyper-V virtual switch are awful, and
Yeah.
I have complained about them for many, 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 many years. And the powers that be at Microsoft, either they just don't want to change, or they don't listen to me, or they don't believe me, or whatever. But having worked with a lot of you folks in the trenches, expect networking to be the thing that really just makes you for a while.
Yeah, I will say that VMware's UIs, when it comes to networking, do seem to be more rich. You know, it's more apparent what's going on. It's easier to navigate and get around. You don't have to mentally visualize as much stuff. You know what I mean?
And I guess that's a matter of perspective. I think VMware's uh, networking is kind of garbage too, and I don't think their UIs are great on that part, mainly because I think the way they conceptualize networking is so garbage. But also,
That's fair.
and I think that's also part of the reason why it's so much harder for a VMware person to go to Hyper-V networking than for somebody who has no idea about any of this stuff who starts off on Hyper-V. I think they're actually going to have it easier, even though they're going to have it hard
Yeah.
because again, I think yeah, I don't love anybody's solution. I think there are ways. I think Microsoft could have done a lot better on the way they present the networking stack. That it wouldn't be such a mind boondoggle, but we are where we are. So
I wonder, and this is just me wondering off the top of my head, I wonder if part of the reason why it has not improved is because you look at what's available to configure in Hyper-V Manager or Windows Admin Center or SCVMM, System Center Virtual Machine Manager, in terms of networking. Compare that with what is available to configure via PowerShell. There's so much more knobs you can turn using PowerShell and networking
mhm.
in Hyper-V than you can through the UIs. And I think about how Hyper-V uses it internally. I absolutely sure that all of the Hyper-V networking done in Azure is all done via PowerShell and scripting and
Yeah.
that type of stuff, right? So I wonder if part of it is like they have this mindset of like, well, you know, the advanced stuff people are just going to use PowerShell for anyway. So why should we waste time improving, you know, the MMC snap in for Hyper-V, right?
I've got a billion. I've heard a billion explanations and a billion different things. Part of it is when Microsoft interfaces with customers. One of the things they're doing is they're kind of waiting for that nice segue to bring in a gold partner and then punt.
Yeah.
Right? They kind of want to bring the customer on board, get them okay with it, and then say, now let's introduce this gold partner from your region, and then they're going to do the implementation and everything else. So, in Microsoft's mind, an end user is not going to sit around and configure a virtual switch. And I keep trying to say, well, cool, that's nice for the Fortune 500s, but what about the 10 million non Fortune 500s? What are
Yep.
they going to do? And yeah, again, and this is something, if you've been with me for very long, you know that I'm always like, I'm really here for that, the small, medium businesses, because I don't think
Yep.
Microsoft pays attention to them very well. And this is one place I think that really stands out is you can't afford to have a gold partner on call for every last little thing you need. And setting up a virtual switch isn't hard, but you have that. What do I do for the very first time? Is you're 100% right, Andy, that PowerShell makes it super easy, but discoverability in a command line interface is always a
Yes.
problem. So
Yep.
how do you figure out which commands you're supposed to run? That is the problem,
Yep.
right? And
Agreed.
the GUI, it should be that discoverable thing, but there isn't a good GUI for the Hyper-V stuff at this time. So yeah.
Yeah. And it's funny you mentioned that. You and I did an episode specifically about the management story behind Hyper-V because folks have, you know, if you haven't seen that episode, so far in this episode, you've heard me say Hyper-V Manager, System Center Virtual Machine Manager, PowerShell. I haven't mentioned Failover Cluster Manager yet, which is yet another tool, and you have Windows Admin Center. What do you use and when? Well, we won't explain the whole thing here, but we'll link that particular episode in the show notes so you can learn about that whole thing.
So to go back to the original question that opened this section, I think newcomers to it should start with Windows 11, use Client Hyper-V. When you install it, it will set up your primary network adapter in NAT mode, network address translation, and it'll connect your VMs to that, and it'll just take care of the networking for you while you kind of get
Yep.
situated, basically. The biggest trick here is that the virtual switch, in order to allow virtual machines to connect to the network, a virtual switch has to completely consume a physical network adapter, at least one. If you're going to team them, it's got to consume the team, whatever, however you're doing it. But nothing in the interface makes it obvious that that's what's happened.
Yeah.
Especially like they're saying, oh, do you want to allow the virtual, what is it? Do you want to allow to share?
Management.
What is that
Allow
term?
this to be a management NIC as well or something.
Something
I
like,
forget.
do you want to allow them, the management operating system, to share this adapter or something? It makes
Yes.
it sound like
Yep.
there's going to be this sharing thing going on with the physical adapter, and it's not at all what happens. It takes over that entire adapter, the physical adapter takes it over, it absorbs it, it consumes it, it sucks it up into the hypervisor layer, and it owns it. You can't use it
Yep.
for anything else anymore. And it's just not obvious, right? And then but
Yeah.
what then the thing decides to do, if you take the faults and just click through, is it makes a virtual network adapter that it then names after the virtual switch. So newcomers walk in there and go, look, there's my virtual switch right there in the network adapters thing. I can see it. You're lying to me, Eric. I see it. Like, that's not the switch. That is a virtual network adapter that happens to be named after the virtual switch. Great job. I mean, so confusing, right? To people who are coming at it new. It's not your fault. Again, it's not your fault. Give yourself the grace and time to understand this, because the interfaces are just not great. It's not your
Yep.
fault, right? You cannot see the virtual switch in any GUI interface to speak of.
Yep.
At least
You've
nothing that you're
also
used to as an admin. So,
right, exactly. And then you have those three switch types, right? You have external, internal, and private, where external is exactly what it sounds like. The switch can talk to the outside world. Internal means that the host and any other VMs associated with that internal vSwitch can talk to each other. And then private is like, okay, this VM can only talk to itself, basically. If I remember correctly. I never use private.
uh,
I know I
no. So private
private
is
private excludes
private
the
is
host.
yes, private. Yes, all
Yeah,
the
that's
VMs can
what it is.
talk using
Yep.
privates, but the host can't participate on that switch.
Yep.
With the internal, the host can participate on the switch, but nobody can talk off the physical box, period,
Correct. Yep.
through it. And then the external then just adds in the physical layer.
Yep. The private vSwitch type is like that bastard stepchild. It sits in the corner, and I never use. I never use that
It,
particular option.
I have in the past I wrote on ways that it could be used, but it would its use would be limited, because we also are really big on virtual machine mobility. And so if you take
Yeah.
a virtual machine that's using that private switch and then migrate it to another host, well, it's off that switch, because that switch is locked to that other
Yeah.
physical machine. So it's not that they don't have uses, but you really got to get your head wrapped around it. It just seems like, oh, it's just use an external switch and be done with it.
Yeah. Yeah. I
But
mean,
I don't
like,
want to take away their uses. And then, you know what? And I've also something, a topic I've wanted to embark on forever and really hasn't, is maybe when we think about high availability in HA, maybe we should not be so excited about live migrating virtual machines anymore. Maybe we should move HA back to the application layer and just let the virtual machines live on one host for their entire life. Maybe we should do that. And then in that case, that would bring viability back for the private and the internal switches. But
yeah, I
that's a
can
whole
see that.
other, that might be another episode.
That's a whole other episode. Yeah, for
Yeah, I
sure.
don't want to get too far into that, but there are uses for these things.
Yeah, I mean, I could see it definitely in a case where, like, okay, maybe I'm a hoster or something, and I don't know, I'm reaching, but like I said, maybe I'm a hoster or something, and I'm a customer running a VM on that host, and I don't trust the host, right? Because not my organization, so I want to isolate my VM as much as I can. Again, I'm stretching, like you said, it's tough to come up with use cases for that particular switch type, but it's there anyway in case people want to tinker with it. So, the other thing I wanted to make sure we covered briefly in this episode is storage. We could do a whole episode just on storage for Hyper-V, but you've got all your usual stuff, right? You can, if you mentioned client Hyper-V, Eric, where you just run a Hyper-V on a Windows 11 endpoint, you're going to use the local disk, right, to store the VHDX files, right? That's like the Hyper-V equivalent to VMDK. VHDX is your virtual hard disk type. So you store that on local disk. But, you also have other options with Hyper-V on Windows Server. You can use SMB shares and iSCSI targets and, a lot of different options there. Storage space is direct, right? If you want to do that configuration. So, in terms of storage, like I said, we could spend a whole episode on it, but getting started, you'll probably just use local. So, and in terms of running that first virtual machine, you're going to most likely spin up Hyper-V Manager. Maybe you'll use Windows Admin Center because you're reading something on Microsoft Learn. Uh, Eric and I have strong feelings about Windows Admin Center. That's a whole other episode all by itself. Maybe we've done an episode on Windows Admin Center. I don't remember if we have. We've talked about doing one before, but we haven't. But most likely you're going to start out with Hyper-V Manager, right? Because it's kind of the de facto, my first Hyper-V management tool type of thing. And so when you spin up your first virtual machine, this question I always run into, Eric, is like, oh, do I select generation 1 or generation 2 virtual machine, right? And really what it comes down to is that generation 2 virtual machines have more newer, modern capabilities that generation 1 virtual machines do not. Generation 1 presents itself as older types of hardware. Generation 2, more modern. I personally do not remember the last time I configured a Gen 1 virtual machine.
No.
I don't remember the last time.
With the way the world is working, I would almost say you need to go Gen 2. One of the things you lose out. So Gen 2, one of the probably the core difference between the two. Gen 2 is a unified extensible firmware interface, UFI.
Yep,
I hope I got the words right there. Unified extensible firmware interface, I think is what that stands for.
I think
UFI
that is,
mode.
yeah. Yep,
Gen 1 is BIOS mode.
yep,
So what you lose in BIOS mode is the ability for secure boot and trusted platform modules.
yep,
You can't have them in a Gen 1. And so like that that's a problem for Windows 11. It's going to be a problem for more operating systems as time goes on.
yep,
So what I usually tell people, if you don't have a defined reason walking in to use a Gen 1 machine, go Gen 2. If they haven't already, they're going to start moving the interfaces on the newer versions of Windows so that whenever you start to create a virtual machine, it tries to make it Gen 2 and you have to say, no, 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 I want Gen 1. The only thing I've run into at any kind of recently is if you absolutely must have a COM port. And I don't mean a physical COM port on the box, that doesn't work. But if the virtual machine must have something it can reference as COM1 and you don't have a choice, you've got to have that, then Gen 1 is about the only way to go. But the only thing I know that you can really do with that is debug sessions. Like if you're going to debug a virtual machine from the hypervisor. And we are way out into who does that. Well, I do that. And I know other people that do that, but not many. Most people don't do that.
right.
Do you know how to attach a debugger to a virtual machine through a COM port, Andy?
I'm
Do
not
you?
sure I've ever done that. I'm not sure I've ever done
Yeah,
that.
and you're an expert, okay? So
No.
most of your average users, sysadmins, are never going to do that.
Ah,
That's really the biggest use case for this, and there are still ways to do it with a Gen 2 without doing all the COM port
yeah.
stuff too. So
I could
you're
see the
really,
value, but I I've just always done that stuff other ways. Yeah.
yeah, who really needs to
Right.
do virtual machine kernel debugging from the hypervisor? Not
Right.
very many people.
Yeah.
Not very many people. I've talked to some people at AMD who needed to do it. You know what I mean?
Yep. And that makes
It
sense,
is not common. Yeah, it's just not a common thing.
Yeah, it's not.
So for the average, I would say more than the average. I would say into the 90th percentile of sysadmins create Gen 2. Don't just start with Gen
Yep.
2 and don't even think about Gen 1. It's not worth your time. Or are you going to run Windows Server 2003? Yeah, then you have to have Gen 1. The older operating systems would not function
Right.
on Gen 2. I think 2008, if it's 32-bit, like if it's a 64-bit, it should always work. But anyway, that's not the
Yep.
point. Gen 2, just Gen 2.
Yeah. Good good insights there. No, we're running out of time for this episode, but three other things I wanted to mention really quick that you'll probably see when you're, starting to use Hyper-V for the first time, spinning up virtual machines. This concept of integration services. So, for those folks that are more familiar on the VMware side, this would be your VMware tools. Integration services is VMware tools on the Hyper-V side. And the nice thing is is they get updated with Windows Update, right?
One of the
Super
biggest
easy.
selling points is
Yep.
so I don't know how long you've messed with a VMware environment, but I have frequently run into if you do VM tools at the same time on the same reboot as a Windows update, you might not be able to boot the VM until you go in and kick it.
Yep. Exactly.
So
Yep.
then you get in this thing, well, I got to update VM tools in one update cycle, and I got to update Windows Update in another update cycle. And oh, that's so much fun. Don't have to do that on Hyper-V.
Nope.
Not for Windows, and bonus round, not for Linux either, because the integration services are part of the official Linux kernel and have been for
Long
a
time.
decade.
Long time now. Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
So one update cycle. And you know what? If you want to tell your, if you're like, I'm the Hyper-V admin here, and then there's all the Windows admins who run their own VMs, they're responsible for that OS. Let them patch their own stuff. From now on, you don't have to get involved anymore.
Yep. Yeah, I've always loved that about Hyper-V. The integrate it's just I don't even think about integration tools. Whereas I remember patching machines running on VMware back in the day. Like, yeah, okay, I've updated the host. Now I need to upgrade
Hmm.
the VMware tools, and it's a whole thing. But
I don't think
um,
there's a bigger, the bigger your layout is, the more money you save. It's
oh, for
amazing.
sure. Yep,
People
for
don't,
sure.
a lot of corporations don't think, well, I pay my admins whether they show up or not. Like, cool, but what if they could put their time into something else?
Yep, agreed.
You save money, even if you don't necessarily see it in your bottom line. You save money by doing.
Yep, agreed. Um, the next feature I wanted to mention that you'll probably see as you start configuring a new VM is dynamic memory. This is one of my personal favorite features. Works for both Windows virtual machines as well as most modern Linux distributions as well too. I only ever use
You know,
Debian. I know it works with Debian.
well, it's
If
part of
I'm
the
honest, if
kernel,
it works with
so
Debian, it works with most others.
yeah, as long as
But
they're recently in line with the official Linux kernel, it works.
yep, exactly. And what this feature does is you don't have to set a static, this virtual machine has 2 gigs of memory and always, at all times, has 2 gigs of memory. You can define a range. You can say, hey, I want you to boot with, you know, 2 gigs of memory, but if you don't need that much, you can go down to half a gig. Or if you need some, you can go up to 6, right? And the hypervisor handles the allocation of the memory based on the ranges you define. And I have some talk to some folks that are like, well, you could over provision your memory that way. Yes, you could, but I've had dynamic
But you
memory.
can't. You can and can't. It's so
Right,
on VMware
exactly.
you can. You can absolutely can. And then
Yep,
VMware makes the decision on who gets the memory. In this case,
correct.
it doesn't do that. So there's and I realize I want to be sensitive for time here, but there positives and negatives on the way VMware does it versus the way that Hyper-V does it.
Yep,
But I'm with you, Andy. Over time, I've come to respect the Hyper-V way more, even though in the beginning,
yep,
because it does require more thought on the part of the hypervisor administrator. That's the part that kind of sucks. You have to plot it a little bit more than you would have on a VMware environment. But the actual rubber meets the road results are better, in my opinion,
yes,
than what
yep.
VMware does.
Agreed. And personally, I'd rather have more control over more knobs if I have to, um, or if I have the ability to. So definitely, I'm with you. So, dynamic memory, fantastic feature. Highly recommend you use it because historically, we as admins we tend to over provision memory. We just do, right? I know,
Mhm.
I do. And so now that I can set a lower floor than I think I'm gonna need, um, the hypervisor just handles it for me. And oh yeah, that machine that I thought was going to need two, oh look, it's using 800 megs, right? And I get to keep the rest, which is great. So, um, I also had on my list here, Eric, to talk about checkpoints, but I think that's a whole other
That needs its
discussion, right?
own. That needs its
Yep.
own. Yeah, because
So
wow, those can
checkpoint.
be abused.
Yep, exactly. So checkpoints are basically the Hyper-V version of snapshots, but there's some differences, and we'll cover that in a future episode. But I also had some common questions here. I think we've answered most of them throughout the episode, but the one that we have not has to do with you've probably heard me mention it in this episode: System Center Virtual Machine Manager (SCVMM). SCVMM is I've heard it described as the vCenter equivalent, and it's kind of true, but kind of not, right? Um, you can manage entire Hyper-V clusters, massive deployments using System Center Virtual Machine Manager. You don't have to use it. It's not the only tool at your disposal to manage massive deployments of Hyper-V. You can manage Hyper-V clusters using Failover Cluster Manager. You can use Windows Admin Center. There's a lot of different things you can do. PowerShell. The one thing, and we'll talk about this more in our clustering episode, Eric, but if somebody is trying to tell you that you need System Center Virtual Machine Manager to manage your 2-node Hyper-V deployment, no. Goddamn no, you do not need to use System Center Virtual Machine Manager for that.
No. And I don't want to try to say something that's going to be official. I have a unofficial that when VMM can be retired, it will be. Microsoft doesn't have a roadmap for its replacement that I'm aware of yet, but it does sound like they don't want VM. Yeah, it sounds like unofficially, quietly, rumor mill, the VMM is basically on life support. So definitely, if you don't absolutely need it, there are a lot of places you're just going to have it for a lot of reasons. And there will be something to take its place. They're not going to just drop it off the face of the earth. That's going to be the end of it. But I wouldn't get myself heavily invested in it unless there's some sort of like, well, we got to have it because like Citrix, if you're doing Citrix management through their PVS product, you have to have the MM. So stuff like that. But yeah, just to kind of put that out there. And I could be wrong too. They may come back and make a liar out of me too. So there's that. But it's not an official announcement, basically.
Right. I once, in my MSP days, I once walked into a manufacturing facility to stand up a new Hyper-V cluster, and the sales person that sold it didn't really understand Hyper-V that well. So I walk into 2 physical servers, licensing for 2 physical Hyper-V hosts and the associated virtual machines they needed, and a System Center Virtual Machine Manager license. And the first thing I said was, take this back. We don't need it. Oh, we can't return it. So set it up anyway. And I'm just like, am I really setting up VMM for a 2-node cluster? Oh, that's a whole story in and of itself. Anyway, well, Eric, good talking to you as always, my friend. It's been a while since we've nerded out on Hyper-V. Like I said, this is going to turn into a 2-parter. This is fun. We're going to have to do it again.
Let's do it. Keep going. Not right now. Obviously, let folks go on with their day.
I know, right? Well, we'll do another one here in the near future. So anyway, I appreciate you all spending some time with us today. Hopefully you found value in today's episode. Again, if you want to be part of the show, you can leave comments on the YouTube versions of our show. You can leave comments on the Spotify versions of our show. I love to cover comments on the show. I actually have 2 that are in my backlog, but we'll cover that in the next episode. But definitely, by all means, we love to read comments on the show and provide feedback and laugh and whatever the comment's about, right? So by all means, again, you can find all the links associated with the show at www.sysadminweekly.com, and be sure to check out our companion newsletter as well at newsletter.sysadminweekly.com as well. With that, we'll let you get back to your day. Thanks for spending some time with us, and we'll see you again next week for a future episode of SysAdmin Weekly. Have a good one.